Gentlemen, to this, the second Energy Mkutano. It's a permutation for which we have incorporated the minerals space this time, which is very exciting. And I thank you for braving the obstacle course that is Kampala now on a rainy day. So we appreciate you making your way here on time. So there's delegates in the room and some online, so karibu. It's our first time at this venue. But I think what we try and pride ourselves in as regards the Mkutano is the fact that the venue is secondary to the qualitative discourse, and what happens after is where we place most of our emphasis. But before diving into the details, we're privileged to have been invited to be part of this year's Energy and Minerals Week by the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Energy and Minerals Development, which really requires a round of applause for the Honorable Minister for inviting us to be a part of this, and in particular, the Permanent Secretary, who is chairing this session. So welcome, Permanent Secretary. And accompanied with the Permanent Secretary for us is Professor, I like to call him Professor, Mr. Ayota, the MD of the NSSF, a good friend of the Mkutano. Welcome. So he gives us that dimension from a pensions perspective, and also helping him is the Honorable Dr. Gabriel Ajedra, who is the former Minister of State for Finance. You're welcome. So there's an interesting complement of participants here. I think it's safe to suffice, ladies and gentlemen, that it is a business-to-business engagement, but when you're talking energy and minerals, B2B cannot progress without the underlying infrastructure and policy framework of the government. So by default, these two sectors are always going to be a partnership between the private sector and government and the peripherals that come around it. I think what we have done, Mr. Chair, is that we've, as a Mkutano, really placed emphasis on the aftermath of our convenings. And if I can just make reference to what happened in February, where we had a discussion on the industrial zone space. There was an immediate commissioning of a technical working group that has been progressing the discourse to develop a pragmatic green industrial zone, which has brought together several actors from the private sector, the government through the Free Zones Authority, and there's a couple of development partners involved. I see Trademark Africa is here, the NSSF is part of it, and what we do is decide to really put our resources as a collective into the basket and make sure that we get a project going. I'm particularly pleased again that Professor Ayota is here, is our day one partner, and Honorable Ajedra represents a company, chairman of ASCA Group is around, that is doing phenomenal stuff in both the infrastructure space as it speaks to energy and by extension to minerals. So, karibu sana. I think you may hear, as at least something that plays in my head, is that the Ugandan mining industry is nascent. I think that's a bit of a misnomer. Pre-colonial times, there's a lot of mining activity, salt mines out in Katwe, and in Bunyoro, Kitara, we had phenomenal exports pre-colonial times with our iron ore and the products that came through it. But having said that, the conversation on contemporary mining that requires huge infrastructure, creative finance structures, and the foundational elements that go with it when it speaks to the capacity of your human resource, your evacuation and logistics infrastructure, requires us to take lessons from other jurisdictions. And I'm pleased, Mr. Chairman, that the first panel is going to cover that with references from Tanzania that has a very interesting contemporary conversation on huge investment in mining, and Botswana, that we have a panelist who's going to share some nuggets from their market. I'm particularly excited that we'll be hearing from a keynote speaker. Her name is Ms. Catherine Foster, who will really touch on collaborations on innovative digital finance and business models for community-led renewable energy, Mr. Chairman, as that is a priority of your ministry and the government at large. We will have a presentation from UNCDF on some of their projects in off-grid power. PSFU, another emerging partner of ours, will talk about their catalytic fund, for which there is a tilt towards the smaller businesses, some of whom are in the mining sector, some of whom are in energy. And then that serves as a nice precursor to the business circle, where for the first time at the Mkutano, we're creating a panel out of the delegate pool. So there's experts here in your various fields, and it would be remiss of us to not harvest the opinions, experiences, and collective brain power. So I'm very excited about that particular session. Before we conclude, we'll hear from an esteemed venture capitalist, Mr. Sheriff El-Sayed, who will talk about the opportunities that lie in the climate transition. Just a few facts that I'm sure you're familiar with, because this really speaks to the linkage between the mineral sector and energy. Energy accounts for 30% on average of the operating costs of your average mine. That's a significant amount. The energy consumption of the world's mining industry corresponds to 80% of electricity use. So there's an intrinsic linkage between both. Recently in Nairobi, there was the Africa Climate Summit, where within the conversation of the energy transition, and now we're calling it a just energy transition for countries like us, who have recently discovered fossil fuels, what pace are we going to convert to renewables, at least have a significant component of our energy from it? But even when you do that transition, there's critical minerals within electric vehicles, drones, etc., that are intrinsic and specifically fundamental to the success of those sectors. So you can't have a conversation on energy without minerals, and vice versa. And Uganda is always framed as a blessed country, and we talk about our tourism, our culture, our food, and everything else, but imagine a country that on one end has 4.5 billion barrels of oil, and then if you go to Karamoja, you have abundance of wind energy. You go to Pakwach, there is solar irradiation that's as high as you can get globally. You have geothermal. Chairman, I'm sure you're involved in that project out in Semaliki. And then the hydropower that we have central to our formal electricity production. So we need to figure out, within the context of our own energy security and the underlying minerals, what makes most sense for our development growth. But I'm not here to preach, I'm just the curator. We present the canvas. Gentlemen, you shall paint. I just forgot to mention that my dear friend Mark Mutahi will be chairing the session on mines, and we're privileged as well to have the CEO of the Chamber of Mines and Petroleums, who I've learned today was in the same school as me, so I hope I didn't bully you or take your grub. Karibu Humphrey. And last but not least, I'd like for you to join me in thanking our partners today, Stanbic Bank, the NSSF, the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, thank you, UNCDF, Mandalis, UNREA, and DMARC Mobile, who are also our day one partners. And again, thank you to the Ministry of Energy for allowing us to share this platform. Happy deliberations to you all. Asante.